Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Biblio Fitness. Hope everyone is having a great day today. Make some gains and get some reading done. So today is about a great conversation between Ivan and Alyosha at a tavern in the brothers Karamazov. I forgot about this part, but now that I remember about it, I'm like, oh shit, this is one of those parts that I was low key looking forward to again. um, like I've said this before, Ivan is probably the person that I most feel a kinship with. His pessimism, his complete lack of care, or really just being very cynical and mocking towards Christianity, mocking towards this promise of a greater utopia and how and all that other stuff. So the problem with the conversation that first begins with Alyosha and Ivan just getting to know one another. Ivan tells him that we never really gotten close, and I'm about to leave, and I've been here for 4 months, but you and I have not really had any, really actual conversation. And he's like, well, I'm glad that I was able to see you before I leave to Moscow, before I leave. And he's like, oh, you're seriously going to leave? You seriously want to, you're seriously gonna leave you're gonna leave my brother and his father? And he lashes out at that. He's like, dude, that's not my problem. I have nothing to do with that. He gets mad. He's like, oh, what does that have to do with me? Am I my brother's keeper? In which he references Cain, the whole Cain and Abel story. And they go on to talk about how Ivan has a view of the world. And that's what he wants to talk about with Alyosha, because he knows Alyosha is very curious, as Ivan says, if thou believe in something, what does thou believe in? I mean, I don't think that's the accurate question, but I'm paraphrasing to the best of my knowledge, well, to the best of my recollection. So, and Ivan makes a very cool thing, like he said, because I remember Alyosha tells him, he's like, oh yeah, you're still very green, you're still very young, and you still have a lot to learn, which we're talking about Katerina and the whole story about how he walked out and he told her, oh yeah, you never really loved me. You're just using me to lash out against my brother. And he was talking about that. He's like, yeah, bro. He's like, you know what? That's a very coincidence they told me that, because that's what I was just thinking about, how youthful I am, how green I am. And he talks about how, he's like, he wants to live life. And even if he loses faith in the woman he loves, even if he loses faith in the order of things, even if he loses faith in the world, and then just to completely contrast that, even if he develops all the human disillusionment that is possible in the world, his youth will overcome all that. His love of life, his love for life, his love to live. And he goes on, but he's like, oh, but until I'm 30, though. I'm gonna have my fill of my cup until I'm 30. And even if I haven't filled my cup, drank the whole thing, I'm gonna walk away from life. I don't want to be a part of this world for such a long time. And he goes on to say that, when you go until 30, you still retain a ting of nobility that you can kind of fool yourself with. And I feel like the reason that he says that is because he doesn't want to be an active member in this cruel world. This world is very cruel. This world is very, we'll discuss that a little bit later on in this video. Give me one second. When he talks about his father, for example, how he says, oh yeah, my father wants to live until he's 70 or even 80. And that's too much. All you can stand is on your sensuality at that point. Life is just going to take so much away from you. It is just going to beat you down and make you a pessimist, and you are going to give up, and you're just going to become a pessimistic, self-centered, selfish person. And he wants to walk away from all the world before he becomes an active member in the cruelty of the world. I feel like that's my interpretation, because then he goes on to talk about, he's like, hey, so what do you want to ask me? Do you want to ask me, do I believe in God, or do I believe in the order of things? Do I know what's going to happen? Because it's very interesting, because they go ahead and talk about, because he asked, Ivan asked him, like, oh, so what brought you here today? What conversation do you want to have? Do you really want to talk about Katerina? Do you really want to talk about Fyodor? Do you really want to talk about our brother? And he's like, no, I want to know what you believe in. And Ivan's like, yeah. He's like, you know what? Would you be surprised if I told you that I do think there is a God? And that I do think that there is an order of things, that there is this eternal harmony over encompassing all this existence? And it's like, yeah, I'd be very surprised unless you're joking. And he's like, oh, I'm not joking at all. I do believe there's a God. I do believe there's an order of things. I do believe there's a harmony in it all. And even, because he makes the point that we have very constricted minds. We have minds that are just confined in a three-dimensional space. And he makes a reference about how some Euclidean geometers or whatever, Euclidean, I don't know what that means, but like he makes the distinction how, in the real world or in this world, two parallel lines would never meet. But then he goes on to make an example that there are geometers and other mathematicians and stuff and things of that nature that are making the case that somewhere in infinity, those two parallels do meet. And he's like, dude, that's beyond my comprehension. I can't understand that. I don't know how that's possible. So if I can't understand that, there's no way I can question the existence of God, because it's beyond my scope of competence. It is beyond my scope of understanding. And that's a very, very interesting point. He tells Alyosha, I don't think you should waste your time questioning whether there's the existence of God or not. We are never going to know. We are never going to make an absolute distinction, because it is beyond our scope. It is beyond our level of competence. But then he goes on to say, like, even if there was a God and there is a harmony in things, I refuse to abide by that law. I refuse the harmony of it all. I refuse the order of it all. I don't want to be a part of that world. Even if the two parallel lines would meet in front of me, I don't want nothing to do with it. And Alyosha's like, why would you say that? Like, why would you believe in God and not want to believe in the order of things? And so he goes on to talk about suffering, which is the quintessential existentialist thought, or the basis of existentialist philosophy. And that's what Fyodor Dostoevsky is, right? An existentialist, a man that is really trying to figure out, why are we suffering? What is all the suffering for? Is this suffering going to a higher purpose, or what's the deal? And Ivan goes on to elaborate his own story. He's like, he goes on to first talk about loving one's neighbor, how it's impossible to love one's neighbor. Maybe in an abstract fashion that could be attained, but not in reality. Like when you look at someone, you see how ugly they are, or you see how they walk, or how they stepped on your foot, or they said something bad about you, you could no longer develop that unconditional love. Like you can't do that. He says that it's impossible to do so because humans are fucking imperfect. Humans are disgusting. Humans are in their own stupid vices. And how can you love people like that? How can you love animals like that? Very selfish, very greedy, very destructive forces. And Alyosha makes it very naive. He's like, oh yeah, my elder told me about that. That's really what separates people from developing an unconditional love as Jesus could develop. But he's like, oh, but I really do believe there is a world like that. There is a love like that in this world. And I've been like, no, I don't believe that shit. And there's a multitude of countless people that agree with me that we can't understand that. Again, he goes on to say like, Jesus was God. Well, I'm not God. I can't do what he does. I'm not on that level. Like, you can't expect me to follow that ideal when I'm not even in the same position, right? I'm not a deity. I'm not a fucking son of God or anything like that. You can't expect me to love my neighbor. And most people don't even ever take into account another person's suffering, knowing damn well that we all suffer, right? We all suffer through things. We all are going through things. But we never take other people's suffering into account. My suffering is important. I don't care about other people's suffering. I care about my suffering. That's usually how it goes. That's the common chain of thought possessed by most individuals. And he was even talking about, poor people, panhandlers, like how they will make more money if they put alms in the papers instead of walking around all dirty and shit looking for money. They'd be doing much better in the newspaper. People asking for donations through that, because there's that separation, right, between an ideal and the reality of it all. There's always this very strong antithesis between both of them, right? And that's just something that I constantly talk about, like reality and idealism, and how so many philosophies really try to connect it all together. But once you really get down to the grassroots of it all, it starts tearing away at the seams. And that's what I was making in the case of that unconditional love. And then he elaborates even more on that suffering. He's like, no, we could talk about, he's like, even, talk about, beggars and people that suffer, and we can't seem to connect with our suffering. How we even make others suffer when it looks like they're not really suffering. Like, who the fuck are they? Like, we get very spiteful just because they don't look like they're suffering just like us, and we become envious, and all these negative emotions start developing as well. And then he goes on to talk about the suffering of children. And he's like, let's narrow down my argument to just children. You can love children up close. You can love children up close. You can look at them and still love them unconditionally because they're just children. They're innocent. They haven't taken a bite out of the apple, They don't know the distinction between good and evil. They didn't become as gods when we took a bite out of the apple, or when we got the fire from Mount Olympus, or whatever other analogy you want to throw in there, right? But he's like, why do children have to suffer? Why do we have to, there is that, ridiculous case in Christianity that we pay for the sins of our fathers because we are collectively sinful. As a species, us being human is a sin, which is probably one of the biggest things that I hate about Christianity, that you being alive is a sin in itself. And that's what he talks about. He's like, but why do children have to suffer for that? Why do children have to suffer for the sins of their fathers? Or they have nothing to do with it. And he's like, oh, I know that, what I just said, there's all collective sin and there's a collective fault. But that's reasoning from another world, and that's beyond my comprehension. I don't understand how that's possible. Therefore, I reject it. Which is the main argument, which is probably the foundation of his argument. It's like, I don't understand why we need all this. It's stupid. And he goes on to talk about how he likes to look up stories, and how you met some person in Belgium that talked about, how there was like the Turks and people, the Turks and stuff going into, into Bulgaria, I think it was, to quell a Slav uprising. And he starts talking about the atrocities, how they would rape and kill the women and children, how they would hang people by their ears on fences and then hang them the next day, how they would go to pregnant women and cut them open with a dagger, how they would throw kids up and stab them and catch them with bayonets, how there's one story of a group of troops were, going with a nursing mother with a baby, and they start making the baby laugh, making it feel comfortable, and then the guy puts a fucking pistol to the baby's face. Obviously the baby doesn't know anything, doesn't know any better, is innocent. And he grabs it, starts playing with it, and the guy just shoots the baby in the face. Why do they have to suffer? Why? Well, we'll get to that. I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So, and then Ivan goes on to talk about good old Russians and how they love to beat their children, how they love the birch and the lash, which is something that was left behind by the Tartars, and how he talks about that there's a poem of a guy, a poor drunk, beating the shit out of his horse because the poor horse was dead, like dying, with too much load in the back, and the guy would just beat the shit out of this goddamn horse, even in the eye. And he talks about how the horse really trying to escape and whimpering and doing all these convulsions. Very pitiful to see. And he goes on that we love torturing children here. He talks about a case of a man that a very smart guy, and he said he had a whip, and he liked how it had a little bit more twigs on it, so he could smarten up his kid. And he would just beat her and beat her and beat her. And he goes on to say that there are people that develop this level of sensuality with the action of torture, with the action of whipping. As like you develop this fervor, right? Like you develop this momentum of carnage, of violence. This beast that's contained within all of us really comes out to play. and how you whip once and then you whip twice, and then the more you whip, the more excited you get and the harder you go, and then you whip for 1 minute and then 5 minutes and then 10 minutes, and somehow they take the case to court and the man gets acquitted. The lawyer, his lawyer is like, dude, it's just because of stupid morals nowadays that we're even taking this to court. This is a father. He has every right to beat the shit out of his child. Which is obviously a distinction. Which is obviously something that all of us Hispanics deal with. We all got our asses whooped by our mothers and our fathers. Very old school. And that's probably has not escaped. And then he goes on to talk about another terrible story. How this very smart couple, this smart woman and father and mother who hated their child. She was like a 5-year-old girl. And they would beat the fuck out of this kid, bro. Beat the fuck out of her, beat her, kick her, humiliate her, until she was nothing but a pile of bruises. And then one day the little girl wants to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and somehow wakes up the parents. And what does the mother do? She grabs the kid's shit and shoves it in her face and makes her eat it. And then throws her in the outhouse outside in the freezing cold to stay there. And Ivan goes like, how is this mother just sleeping peacefully at night while her 5-year-old daughter is starving, is freezing to death outside? And he's like, can you imagine that poor little girl, beating on her chest, shivering in the dark, alone, crying out, dear God, help me. And there's no help. The poor girl doesn't understand what's going on to her. The poor girl doesn't understand, why me? Why am I going through this? What did I do? Why am I suffering? What did that poor girl do? And then another example, and he talks about how there was very long ago, right before the abolition of serfdom, there was this guy that got retired from the army, had a big estate with 2,000 souls. That's that's pretty obvious. 2,000 serfs, that's pretty big. And he had a big kennel of dogs. He had he had a shit store with dogs and stuff like that. Like, he was a really big fan of hunting. And so one day, this 8-year-old little boy playing outside, accidentally, throwing a rock, accidentally hits the paw of the guy's favorite dog. And then the guy goes like, who the fuck hit my dog? He sees his dog, let me know who the fuck hit my dog. And then people point out the little 8-year-old boy, they grab him and throw him inside, lock him up. And then the next day they wake up and he brings out all the serfs and stuff and all the handlers and the dogs and stuff, and the mother of the little child's in front of everybody, in front of the serfs. And he says, bring the boy out, naked. He says, naked, shivering, not even wanting to make a whimper, how scared he was. And then he goes, yo, tell him to start running. Tell him to start running. Kid bolts and he lets his dogs out, and the dogs literally start ripping this kid open in front of his own mother. And Ivan's like, why? What did these kids have to do for? And if there isn't, and then talking about all that, he goes, that is why I reject the world. I don't reject the existence of God. I don't reject the existence of an order of things, but I do reject the price that has to be paid to find that truth. The price that has to be paid for that harmony, how our harmony as a people is built on a pyramid of bones, especially of children. How many countless of children have been raped and murdered and killed, and they didn't do anything wrong. You know what I'm saying? You're telling me that they're the manure for someone else's future harmony? That's not worth it. It's not a price that I want to pay. I want to give back my ticket for that. I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of the suffering of other individuals just for this false promise that somewhere in the future, everything is going to make sense. That one day the truth will come out. That the murder will lie with the murderers, that the lying will lie with the lying. How that kid and the mother and the torturer and that guy who sick the dogs, they will come together and hug each other, be like, just art thou, O Lord. You are just in your infinite wisdom. And Ivan still goes on to say, and I still reject that. There has to be retribution. There has to be a moment where everything is worth it, where these kids' tears are being redeemed. not just hugging. What the fuck is that? He's like, he's like, it's beyond my comprehension. What price are we paying here? Is the price of truth really worth all the suffering, all this misery, all this pain, all this torture? Is it worth it? I don't think it does. And then he asked Alyosha, like, yo, dude, if you were in charge of creating the world, and you knew that the avenue to create this, and you were in charge of creating this avenue and this destiny of human happiness and stuff like that, would you do it if you knew you had to torture one child? And Alyosha's like, no, I wouldn't be able to. And he's like, do you think most people will accept that sort of harmony, that the only way to achieve happiness is through the torturing and killing of children? Do you think they'll be okay with that? And he's like, no. Like, exactly. No one can love anybody unconditionally because we're all pieces of shit. And then he goes on to talk about, but Jesus loves everybody unconditionally. Jesus forgives everybody. And then, we're going to go on with that. That's going to be another video, which is going to be called the poem by Ivan called The Grand Inquisitor. And I'm low-key very, very, not even low-key. I am extremely excited on that chapter. It's a lot to unpack, like you have to ask yourself that question. Is this truth? Is this facade of Christianity that constantly lies to you, that says, oh, all the suffering you're going through is all worth it because on the other side there will be bliss, there will be paradise, there will be a heaven, and some point in the future Jesus will come down and resurrect everybody, and the reason for all this meaningless suffering will one day make sense. And he rejects that. Ivan's like, dude, even if I would be resurrected and watch these people saying, just art thou, O Lord, he will still reject it. Because it's too much of a price to be paid. Too much. Why do children have to get involved? Like if it's adults, that's fine. Because we did take a bite out of the apple. We know what we're doing. We know what we're involved in. So if evil is inflicted upon us, that's fine. Because we know what we're doing. We are not exempt. But what about children? What do children have to do with it? Then the people make the case, like, oh, but what if that children grows up? And because part of it is like, but he's like, but that kid that was 8 years old did not grow up to be a child. They got fucking ripped up by a bunch of dogs. What the fuck does that kid have to do with anything? What does that little girl have to do with anything? Being stuck in an outhouse, shivering cold, starving, wondering why her parents are doing this to her. Is that truth worth it in the end? All that countless suffering. I think that's the quintessential existentialist question. Is all the shit that we go through worth it? Is it? Collectively even, because we are social creatures. Or is the atrocities inflicted upon us by us through all of history, is it all worth it in the end? And that's the ultimate question, Is my suffering or my evil deeds manure for someone's future harmony? Is that worth it? I don't agree. I don't think it's worth it, and I don't think it makes any fucking sense. But every religion tries to make sense of the suffering, tries to make sense of it all. Why are we suffering? Why are we going through this? That's what religion is now, right? Trying to find a reason, trying to find solace in the despair that is existence. It's a very powerful chapter. It's very powerful, and I can't wait to talk about the Grand Inquisitor, which is going to be the next video that I'm putting out tomorrow, so you guys better stay tuned. Like I keep saying, you guys have to read this book. The more I read it, the more I love it. Yeah, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? Is the suffering worth it? Is it? And then if you really want to if you want to narrow it down to your own existence, are the suffering that you're going through going to be worth it in the end? Is the suffering you're going through going to get you closer to your truth, to your ideal? And that's a question that we need to ask ourselves every day, right? We can't escape suffering. We can't escape despair. We can't escape it all. But we might as well channel that and might as well suffer for the right reasons. But Until next time, guys, I hope you all have a great day. If you have any questions or comments, or you have something to say, please feel free to drop them down below. I'm always willing to have a discussion about this shit. This is very interesting indeed. So, and it's one of the biggest questions of human existence, right? Why the fuck do we suffer? Why do we have to suffer? So, love you all. Hope you all make some gains. Hope you all read. And until next time, peace.